The carriage wheels groaned against the muddy path as rain lashed at the windows like vengeful spirits. Inside, Lady Eleanor Blackwood clutched her black-gloved hands together, watching raindrops race down the glass, each one a tear she could not shed. 3 months since Henry's passing, yet the hollowness in her chest remained unfilled. Perhaps it would always be so. "We're approaching Thornfield Manor, my lady," her driver called through the partition. Eleanor nodded, though he couldn't see her. Thornfield, her late husband's ancestral home and now hers, a widow at 28. The very thought made her stomach tighten. The estate had been uninhabited for nearly 5 years while Henry conducted business in London. Now it would be her refuge or her prison. She hadn't decided which. The carriage rounded a bend, and Thornfield Manor emerged from the mist like a spectre. Gothic spires reached toward the churning sky, and gargoyles leered from rain-blackened stone. Eleanor's breath caught. It was beautiful in its desolation, yet there was something else, a heaviness that seemed to press against her very soul. "Peculiar place to start anew," her lady's maid Martha muttered beside her. "It's the only place left to me," Eleanor replied. Henry's debts had consumed their London townhouse and most of their possessions. Only Thornfield remained, protected by an ancient entailment that bound it to the Blackwood bloodline, or its widows. The carriage halted before stone steps leading to massive oak doors. The manor's caretaker, Mr. Winters, awaited them, a stooped figure beneath a dripping umbrella. Eleanor descended, her boots sinking into mud as she accepted Winters' arm. "Welcome home, Lady Blackwood," the old man said, his voice as weathered as the stone around them. "Thornfield has awaited your return." "I have never been here before," she wanted to say, but exhaustion silenced her correction. Inside, the great hall stretched before them, illuminated by flickering sconces that cast more shadows than light. Dust sheets draped the furniture like shrouds, and the air hung thick with the scent of neglect. Dampness, dust, and something Eleanor couldn't name, something almost metallic. "I've prepared the east wing for your immediate comfort," Winters explained. "The rest of the house will require time to make habitable." "Thank you," Eleanor said, removing her sodden cloak. "Has the staff arrived?" "Only the cook and 2 maids, my lady. The others will arrive tomorrow, weather permitting." He hesitated. "I should warn you, Thornfield has its peculiarities, creaks and groans that might disturb your sleep. Old houses speak, as my mother used to say. I am not easily frightened by architecture, Mr. Winters." The caretaker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, my lady." After a sparse dinner in her chambers, Eleanor stood at the window, watching lightning flash across the moor. Martha had unpacked her few remaining possessions and retired to her adjoining room, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts. A distant mirror reflected her image, pale skin against the black bombazine of her mourning dress, chestnut hair pulled severely away from a face once called beautiful. Now it was merely solemn, with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to the empty room. As if in answer, a low, mournful sound drifted through the walls, not the wind, but something almost like singing, a melody so sorrowful it made Eleanor's heart constrict. She pressed her ear to the wall, but the sound had vanished, leaving her to wonder if grief had finally unraveled her sanity. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by dreams of corridors that stretched endlessly and a man's voice calling her name from behind locked doors. The morning brought weak sunlight and a semblance of normalcy. Eleanor broke her fast with tea and toast, then set about exploring her new domain. Thornfield was larger than she had imagined. 4 floors of chambers, libraries, galleries and parlours, many unopened for years. "The west wing remains sealed, my lady," Winters informed her when she inquired. "Lord Henry's instructions. It requires extensive repairs to be safe." Eleanor frowned. Henry never mentioned this. "His lordship visited rarely in recent years," Winters replied carefully. "The west wing was damaged in a fire some 20 years ago. Lord Henry's father deemed it uninhabitable." "I see." But Eleanor didn't see, not really. Another secret Henry had kept from her. Another piece of his life he had withheld. Their marriage had been a collection of such omissions, not unhappy, but incomplete, as though she had only ever known the edges of the man she called husband. That afternoon, Eleanor found the library, a vast chamber with books climbing to the ceiling. Despite the dust, it was magnificent, and for the first time since arriving, she felt something like peace, until she found the portrait. It hung between two towering bookcases, a man in his early 30s with aristocratic features, dark hair swept back from a high forehead, and eyes so intensely blue they seemed to follow her. Unlike the other paintings in the manor, this one bore no nameplate. "Remarkable resemblance," came Winter's voice from behind her, making Eleanor start. "To whom?" she asked, her hand pressed against her racing heart. "Lord Edmund Blackwood, Henry's great-uncle. They shared the same eyes." Eleanor studied the portrait more carefully. Yes, there was something of Henry in the shape of the jaw, the arch of the brow. But while her husband's face had always been open, almost boyish, this man's expression held secrets and sorrow. "What happened to him?" she asked. Winters hesitated. "The family doesn't speak of it, my lady." "I am the family now, Mr. Winters." The caretaker sighed. "As you wish. Lord Edmund was disowned. He vanished from society in 1789, though rumours persisted that he remained at Thornfield, hidden away. Why was he disowned? Some said madness, others whispered of darker things, forbidden knowledge, unnatural interests. The truth died with those who knew it. Eleanor turned back to the portrait. Edmund's painted eyes held hers with an intensity that made her shiver. And the West Wing, was that his domain? Winter's silence was answer enough. That night, the strange singing returned, louder now, drawing Eleanor from her bed. Wrapping a shawl around her nightgown, she followed the sound into the corridor. The melody led her through the gallery, past sleeping portraits of Blackwoods long dead, toward the sealed West Wing. A door stood before her, not the grand entrance she expected, but a small, unassuming portal half hidden behind a tapestry. The singing emanated from beyond, a man's voice rich with longing. Eleanor reached for the handle. The metal was ice-cold against her palm, and for an instant she hesitated. Then, drawing a deep breath, she turned it. The door opened onto darkness, so complete it seemed solid. The singing stopped abruptly. "Hello?" Eleanor called, her voice swallowed by the darkness. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her. Yet she sensed a presence, a watching, waiting thing just beyond her sight. "I am Lady Eleanor Blackwood," she said, straightening her spine. "This is my home now. Show yourself." A whisper came from the darkness, so faint she might have imagined it. "Eleanor." She took a step forward, and the floor beneath her feet gave way. Eleanor screamed as she fell, her hands grasping at empty air. But before she could plummet into whatever lay below, strong arms caught her, pulling her back from the edge. For one heartbeat, she felt the solid warmth of a man's chest against her back, the strength of hands at her waist. Then she was alone in the corridor, the door to the West Wing firmly closed, as though it had never opened. Martha found her there at dawn, huddled against the wall, shivering. "My lady! What happened? Are you hurt?" Eleanor allowed herself to be led back to her chambers, where Martha fussed over her, stoking the fire and brewing strong tea laced with brandy. "I must have been sleepwalking," Eleanor said, though she knew it was a lie. The memory of those hands, the voice whispering her name, those had been real. By mid-morning she had convinced herself otherwise. Grief played tricks on the mind. Everyone said so. She had imagined the singing, the presence in the darkness. The floor had simply creaked beneath her weight, and in her half-asleep state she had stumbled and frightened herself. Yet when she returned to the library, her gaze was drawn inexorably to Edmund Blackwood's portrait. Those painted eyes seemed to hold a question now, or perhaps a warning. Eleanor spent the afternoon reading through the family record she found in a dusty chest. The official history of the Blackwoods mentioned Edmund only briefly. Born 1756, presumed deceased 1789, unmarried, no issue. But tucked between ledgers, Eleanor discovered a journal belonging to Edmund's sister, Catherine. April 17th, 1789. Edmund is changed since his return from Vienna. Whatever he studied there has twisted his mind. He speaks of thresholds between worlds, of ancient beings who offer knowledge at terrible cost. Father threatens to commit him to Bedlam if he continues his experiments. May 3rd, 1789. The servants whisper that Edmund has made a pact with dark forces. They cross themselves when passing his chambers. I fear there may be truth in their superstitions. Last night, I heard him conversing with something that answered in a voice no human throat could produce. June 21st, 1789. Disaster. Edmund's ritual, whatever unholy thing he attempted, has brought calamity upon us. Father lies dead, his heart stopped at the sight of what emerged from my brother's circle of salt and blood. Edmund himself is gone, yet not gone. I cannot describe what I witnessed, for writing it would make it real. The West Wing is sealed. We will speak of Edmund no more. May God forgive him, for I cannot. Eleanor closed the journal, her hands trembling. Outside, the sun had set, and rain once again lashed against the windows. She should dismiss Catherine's writings as the hysterical imaginings of a different era, yet something in her resisted such easy explanations. That night she ordered Martha to bolt her door from the inside. "Are you expecting trouble, my lady?" Martha asked, her brow furrowed. "Merely a precaution. This old house has made me jumpy." But no bolts could keep out the singing that began at midnight, that same haunting melody, now interwoven with words Eleanor could almost understand, beckoning her toward dreams of blue eyes and shadow-filled corridors. The next day, Eleanor confronted Winters. "You will open the West Wing for me," she demanded. The caretaker blanched. "I cannot, my lady. Lord Henry's instructions. My husband is dead, and I am mistress here. Either you will open it, or I shall find someone who will." Winter's resistance crumbled beneath her determination. That afternoon, he led her to the main entrance of the West Wing, a set of double doors secured with heavy chains. "I must insist on accompanying you," he said as he unlocked the padlock. "The floors are unstable." "As you wish." The chains fell away, and Winters pushed the doors open. Dust motes swirled in the air, illuminated by thin beams of light from boarded windows. The corridor beyond stretched into shadow, lined with doors that had remained closed for decades. Eleanor stepped forward, feeling as though she stood on the edge of a precipice. Something waited for her here, something that had called to her across time and darkness. They explored methodically, Winters guiding her through chambers filled with furniture shrouded in sheets, their grandeur diminished but not erased by years of neglect. Nothing seemed unusual until they reached the final door at the corridor's end. "Lord Edmund's study," Winters said quietly. "This is where—" "Where what, Mr. Winters?" The caretaker shook his head. "Where he was last seen, my lady." The door was not locked, merely stiff with disuse. It opened onto a circular room dominated by a massive desk and walls lined with bookshelves. Unlike the other chambers, this one showed signs of disorder. Books scattered on the floor, papers strewn across the desk, a chair overturned as though someone had left in great haste or been taken. Eleanor moved to the desk, drawn by a leather-bound volume open to a page marked with a ribbon. The text was in Latin, the margins filled with annotations in a flowing hand. Beside it lay a smaller book, a journal. She reached for it. "I wouldn't touch that, my lady," Winters said sharply. But Eleanor had already opened it to the final entry. June 21st, 1789. "Tonight I cross the threshold. The knowledge I have gathered, the sacrifices made, all culminate in this final ritual. If I succeed, I shall understand mysteries that have eluded mankind since creation. If I fail, but I must not contemplate failure. Too much has been invested, too many lines crossed. The candles are lit. The circle is drawn. I hear them now, whispering from the other side. They promise wisdom beyond mortal comprehension. They promise eternity. They come. The journal ended there, the final word trailing off as though the writer had been interrupted or taken. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. What happened to him, Mr. Winters? The truth, this time. The caretaker's face was grey in the dim light. The family claimed he took his own life, overcome by madness. His body was never found. But the servants, they told other stories. What stories? That Lord Edmund opened a door that should have remained closed, that something came through and claimed him, that he still walks these halls, trapped between worlds, cursed to wander in darkness for his hubris. Ghost stories, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. Perhaps? Winters looked around nervously. We should leave, my lady. Evening approaches, and the light is failing. Indeed, shadows had lengthened during their exploration, pooling in corners and beneath furniture. Eleanor replaced the journal, but as she turned to follow Winters, movement caught her eye. A figure standing in the doorway, tall and solid, yet somehow indistinct, like a reflection in troubled water. Mr. Winters, she said, her voice strangled. But when she looked back, the doorway was empty. That night, the singing returned, pulling Eleanor from restless dreams. This time she did not fight it. Wrapping herself in her dressing gown, she followed the melody through silent corridors back to the west wing, back to Edmund's study. The door stood open. Candlelight flickered from within, though she had left no candles burning. She entered, and the singing stopped. A man stood by the desk, his back to her, his form substantial, yet somehow wrong, as though viewed through rippling glass. He wore clothing from another century, a dark coat, a waistcoat embroidered with silver thread. Lord Edmund, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the terror and wonder coursing through her. He turned. His face matched the portrait, the same aristocratic features, the same piercing blue eyes. But where the painting showed a man in his prime, this face was marked by centuries of suffering, eyes haunted by horrors Eleanor could not imagine. "You can see me," he said, his voice the one that had whispered her name, that had sung in the darkness. "Truly see me." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. "No one has seen me in... How long has it been?" "Over 200 years, she whispered. Edmund's laugh was hollow. 2 centuries of darkness, of watching the world through a veil I cannot pierce, of calling out to deaf ears. He moved toward her, and Eleanor forced herself not to retreat. "Until you heard me. You came. Why me? I don't know." He studied her face with hungry eyes. "Perhaps because you, too, exist between worlds. Not fully in the light, not fully in the darkness. I sense your grief, Eleanor Blackwood. It echoes my own isolation." He reached for her, his hand stopping just short of her cheek. Eleanor felt a strange coldness radiating from him, not the chill of death, but of infinite distance. "What happened to you?" she asked. Edmund's face contorted with remembered pain. "I sought knowledge beyond mortal understanding. I opened a door." He glanced at the floor where Eleanor now noticed faint markings, a circle inscribed with symbols she did not recognize. They promised wisdom. They gave me damnation. Entities that exist in the spaces between worlds. They cannot enter our realm without invitation, but they hunger for it. I invited them, and in return they bound me to the threshold, neither living nor dead, neither here nor there. A wanderer in eternal twilight. Is there no escape? There was. A condition. Edmund's form flickered like a candle flame. A price for my release that can never be paid. Eleanor stepped closer, drawn by his sorrow, by the echo of her own loneliness she recognized in his eyes. "Tell me, forgiveness," he whispered. "True forgiveness, from one whose blood was spilled in my ritual. My father died when he tried to stop me. His heart gave out at the sight of what I had summoned. The entities decreed that only forgiveness freely given by his blood could release me. But your family line continued through my younger brother, your husband's ancestor. Edmund's smile was bitter. For 2 centuries, I have watched my family live and die, none able to see or hear me, none able to grant what I cannot deserve. Eleanor's mind raced. Henry had been the last of the direct Blackwood line. With his death, the bloodline had ended, except her hand went to her abdomen, where the faintest swell had just begun to show. The child she had discovered mere days after Henry's funeral, the secret she had not yet shared. "There may be a way," she whispered. Before Edmund could respond, a clock somewhere in the manor struck midnight. His form began to fade. "I cannot remain," he said urgently. "The darkness calls me back, but I will find you again, Eleanor Blackwood. If you truly believe you can help me, I will find you." He vanished, leaving Eleanor alone in the suddenly darkened study. The only evidence of his presence a lingering chill in the air and the haunting echo of his voice in her mind. Outside, a storm broke over Thornfield Manor, lightning illuminating the ancient stones as rain washed away decades of grime. Eleanor stood at the window of Edmund's study, watching the tempest, a strange calm settling over her, despite the revelations of the night. She carried the last of the Blackwood blood within her, the power to forgive, to save a soul trapped between worlds for centuries, might rest in her unborn child. But could she risk it? Could she trust the word of a man who had trafficked with entities from beyond the veil, a man whose ambition had led to death and his own damnation? As lightning split the sky, Eleanor made her decision. She would learn more about Edmund, about the ritual that had condemned him, about the price of interfering with forces beyond mortal understanding. And then, perhaps, she would find a way to bring light to his eternal darkness. Behind her, unseen, a shadow detached itself from the corner of the room, watching with eyes that had never been human, waiting as it had waited for 200 years for the chance that was finally, tantalizingly within reach. Part 2. The morning after her encounter with Edmund's spirit, Eleanor woke with a sense of clarity she had not known since Henry's death. Outside, sunlight glinted on rain-washed windows, the storm having cleared to reveal a crystalline autumn day. She placed a hand on her abdomen, contemplating the miracle growing within, a child who might be salvation or sacrifice. "My lady, you're looking better today," Martha remarked as she brought in a breakfast tray. "Some colour in your cheeks at last." "I slept well," Eleanor lied, accepting a cup of tea. In truth, she had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. "Martha, how long have you served the Blackwood family?" The maid considered this as she laid out Eleanor's garments for the day. "Nearly 30 years, my lady. I was a kitchen maid when Lord Henry's father was master here." "Then you must know the family stories. The rumours about Lord Edmund." Martha's hand stilled on the black silk of Eleanor's daydress. "Those aren't tales for a lady's ears, especially not in your condition." Eleanor's teacup clattered against its saucer. "How did you—" "I've been lady's maid to 3 generations of Blackwood women," Martha said gently. "I know the signs. Was Lord Henry aware before his passing?" "No." Eleanor set the cup down carefully. "I discovered it just after the funeral. It seemed cruel, somehow, that he would never know his child." Martha's weathered face softened. "Life has its own rhythms, my lady. But you should be cautious in your state. This old house harbours unhealthy influences." "Like Lord Edmund's ghost?" Eleanor asked bluntly. The maid crossed herself. "So you've heard him then, the singing?" "More than heard. I've seen him, Martha. Spoken with him." Martha sank onto a nearby chair, her face ashen. "Lord preserve us. No one's seen him since—" "Since when?" "Since Lady Catherine's daughter came to clear the estate after her mother's death. She was the last of the family who knew Edmund in life. They say she encountered something in the West Wing that turned her hair white overnight. She left Thornfield the next morning and never returned." Eleanor leaned forward. "What happened to her?" "She took holy orders, spent the rest of her life in prayer. On her deathbed, she spoke of a debt unpaid and a door left open." Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. My grandmother was her maid. She said Lady Anne died in terror, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. A chill swept through Eleanor despite the fire crackling in the grate. Did she say what she saw in the West Wing? Only that her uncle was not alone, that something waited with him, wearing shadows like a cloak. Martha stood abruptly. "Please, my lady, leave these matters alone. Think of your child." "I am thinking of my child," Eleanor said quietly, "and of a soul that has suffered for centuries." After breakfast, Eleanor returned to Edmund's study, this time in daylight. The room felt different, merely abandoned rather than haunted. Dust motes dancing in sunbeams that streamed through cracks in the boarded windows. She approached the desk, where she had last seen Edmund standing. The journal remained where she had left it. Eleanor opened it again, reading Edmund's entries from the beginning, rather than just the final, chilling conclusion. The early pages revealed a brilliant mind consumed by philosophical questions, the nature of existence, the boundaries between worlds, the pursuit of knowledge beyond human understanding. October 3rd, 1788. Vienna has opened doors I never imagined existed. Professor Kleitman's theories on interspatial thresholds align with ancient texts I discovered in Father's collection. What if the barriers between worlds are not solid but permeable? What if consciousness could traverse these barriers while the physical form remains anchored in our reality? December 18th, 1788. First success today. Through the meditation techniques learned from Kay, I briefly perceived the veil thinning. Colors no human eye was meant to see, geometries that defied natural law. For 3 heartbeats I stood at the threshold and glimpsed what lies beyond. I returned to England tomorrow with new purpose. The entries grew increasingly disturbing as Edmund descended into obsession. He wrote of voices that whispered to him during his experiments, of promises made by entities he called the Watchers. He detailed rituals involving rare herbs, astronomical alignments, and eventually, blood. Eleanor closed the journal, troubled by the transformation it documented, from scholar to something much darker. Yet she could not help feeling a strange kinship with Edmund. His loneliness, his yearning for something beyond the mundane world, echoed her own feelings after Henry's death. A knock at the study door startled her from her thoughts. "My lady?" Mr. Winters stood in the doorway, his expression grave. "A solicitor has arrived from London. He claims it's a matter of urgency regarding Lord Henry's estate. In the Manners study, the real one, not Edmund's abandoned sanctuary, Eleanor received Mr. Finch, a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers and eyes that darted around the room as though expecting to find improprieties lurking in corners. "My condolences on your loss, Lady Blackwood," he said, arranging papers before him. "I represent the firm of Hargrove and Bell. Your husband's affairs were more complicated than initially presented." "What do you mean?" "Lord Henry had debts beyond those already disclosed. Significant debts, secured against properties we believed unencumbered." Finch cleared his throat. "Including Thornfield Manor." Eleanor felt the room tilt. "That's impossible. Thornfield is entailed. It cannot be borrowed against." "The entailment was broken 3 generations ago, my lady. The family maintained the fiction to preserve appearances, but legally, Thornfield has been available as collateral for some time. To whom is this debt owed?" Finch consulted his papers. "A private banking concern, Obsidian Holdings. They've been most patient, but with Lord Henry's passing, they seek resolution. The sum outstanding is substantial, the equivalent of Thornfield's entire value." "They want the house," Eleanor realized, ice forming in her chest. "They're willing to allow you residence for 3 months while arrangements are made," Finch said, not meeting her eyes. "Most generous considering the circumstances. And if the debt were repaid, then naturally Thornfield would remain yours, but the amount—" "How much?" Eleanor demanded. When Finch named the figure, Eleanor nearly laughed despite herself. The sum was astronomical, far beyond anything she could hope to raise. "I'll need time to consider my options," she said, rising to indicate the meeting was concluded. "Of course, Lady Blackwood, but Obsidian Holdings expects a response within the week." Finch gathered his papers. "I should mention their representative plans to visit Thornfield tomorrow to discuss terms. A Mr. Corvus." After Finch departed, Eleanor sat alone in the study, her mind reeling. Henry had never mentioned financial difficulties of this magnitude. Their London lifestyle had been comfortable, but not extravagant. What could have driven him to risk his ancestral home? And why did the name Obsidian Holdings send a shiver of recognition through her, though she was certain she had never heard it before? That night, she waited for Edmund's singing, but the manor remained silent. She paced her chambers until the clock struck midnight, then made her way to the West Wing, drawn by an inexplicable certainty that answers awaited her there. Edmund's study was bathed in moonlight, the floorboards gleaming silver where they caught its glow. Eleanor moved to the desk, running her fingers over the aged wood. "Edmund," she called softly, "I need to speak with you." "Nothing." She closed her eyes, focusing on the memory of his face, the sorrow in his eyes. "Please, Thornfield is in danger. Your home." "Not my home." His voice came from behind her, startling her despite her summons. "My prison." Eleanor turned. Edmund stood by the window, his form more substantial than before, less a spirit than a man cast in twilight shadow. The moonlight seemed to pass through him, casting no reflection on the floor. "You didn't come last night," she said. "The barriers strengthen and weaken with forces you cannot perceive." He moved toward her, a fluid grace in his steps. "Sometimes I can reach through. Sometimes I am held in darkness. I found something today. About Thornfield." She explained the solicitor's visit, the debt, the impending arrival of Mr. Corvus. Edmund's expression darkened with each word. "Obsidian Holdings," he repeated, "and this representative, Corvus, the Raven. You know them? Not them. It." Edmund paced the room, his agitation manifesting as ripples in his form. "The Watchers use such names when they interact with the mortal world. Symbols, references that amuse their twisted sense of humor." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "You're saying this banking concern is a facade? A means for them to acquire what they truly want?" Edmund stopped before her. "They've been patient, Eleanor. 2 centuries of waiting, of watching the Blackwood line dwindle until only one remained. Henry," she whispered, "and now you, and what you carry." His gaze dropped to her abdomen. "You haven't told me about the child." Eleanor stepped back. "How did you know?" "I exist between worlds. I see things others cannot." His voice softened. "The last Blackwood, the culmination of their plan." "What plan? What do they want with my child?" Edmund's form flickered like a candle in wind. "I don't know precisely, but the Watchers don't act without purpose. If they want Thornfield, if they've orchestrated its possession through your husband's debts, it's because something here holds value to them, something they've wanted since I opened the door." Eleanor's mind raced. "The ritual you performed, could it be undone? Not by me. I'm bound to the threshold, neither here nor there. But someone else could close the door you opened." Edmund's eyes, so like Henry's, yet infinitely older, met hers. "Perhaps. But the price would be steep, Eleanor. Steeper than you can imagine." "Tell me." Before he could answer, a sound echoed through the manor, the great front door opening, voices in the entrance hall. "At this hour, past midnight?" "He's here," Edmund whispered, his form beginning to fade. "Earlier than expected. You must go now. Don't let him find you in the West Wing." "Who? Mr. Corvus?" "He isn't human, Eleanor. Whatever face he wears, whatever words he speaks, remember that. Now go." Edmund vanished, leaving Eleanor alone in the moonlit study. She hurried to the door, then hesitated, returning to grab Edmund's journal from the desk. Whatever secrets it held, she couldn't risk them falling into the hands of Obsidian Holdings' representative. She slipped through the West Wing as quietly as possible, making her way toward her chambers. As she passed the gallery overlooking the entrance hall, she paused, drawn by voices from below. "Most irregular, sir. Calling at this hour," came Winter's voice, strained with disapproval. "My apologies for the inconvenience." The responding voice was cultured, pleasant, a gentleman's voice, warm with good humor. "My journey progressed more quickly than anticipated. I would not disturb Lady Blackwood until morning, merely require a chamber for the night." Eleanor peered over the balustrade. In the entrance hall stood a tall figure in an immaculate black travelling coat. Even from above she could sense his commanding presence. As though feeling her gaze, he looked up suddenly, meeting her eyes across the distance. He was striking rather than handsome. Sharp features, pale skin, and eyes so dark they appeared black in the hall's dim lighting. A smile curved his lips as he spotted her. "Ah, but it seems the lady of the house is still awake." He bowed elegantly. "Dominic Corvus, at your service, Lady Blackwood. Please forgive the late intrusion." Eleanor forced herself to descend the staircase with measured steps, Edmund's journal hidden within the folds of her dressing gown. As she approached, Corvus's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too perfect. "Mr. Corvus," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. "We expected you tomorrow." "The roads were remarkably clear," he said, removing his gloves. His hands were pale and long-fingered, immaculate despite his journey. "I hope my early arrival doesn't inconvenience you." "Not at all. Mr. Winters will show you to a guest chamber." She met his gaze directly. "We can discuss business in the morning." "Of course." Corvus's eyes lingered on her face with unsettling intensity. "Though I must say Thornfield suits you, Lady Blackwood, as though you were meant for these ancient stones." His gaze shifted momentarily, looking past her toward the west wing. "And they for you." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draughty hall. "Until morning, then." As she turned to leave, Corvus spoke again. "One small matter, Lady Blackwood. I couldn't help noticing. Is that a journal you're carrying? I'm something of a bibliophile, especially regarding historical documents." Eleanor froze, her hand instinctively tightening around the concealed book. "Merely my personal diary, Mr. Corvus. Nothing of interest to anyone but myself." "On the contrary," he said softly, "I find everything about Thornfield and its inhabitants fascinating." In her chambers, Eleanor locked the door and placed a chair against it for good measure. She could not shake the feeling of wrongness that emanated from Dominic Corvus. Not evil, precisely, but something alien, something that wore humanity like an ill-fitting garment. Edmund's warning echoed in her mind. He isn't human. She opened his journal again, searching for any mention of the entities he called the Watchers. In the later entries, he described them in disturbing detail. May 12th, 1789. "The Watchers exist in dimensions adjacent to our own, perceiving our world as we might view a theatrical performance. They hunger for direct experience of human sensation, our pleasures, our pains, our emotions. They cannot enter uninvited, but they are patient beyond human comprehension, waiting centuries for the right opportunity." June 1st, 1789. "I have learned to recognize their presence. A heaviness in the air, colors that shift at the corner of vision, and most distinctly, a scent like iron left too long in the sun. They offer knowledge as their currency, but I begin to suspect their true motives are far less benevolent than I first believed." Eleanor closed the journal, a terrible suspicion forming in her mind. The metallic scent she had noticed upon first entering Thornfield, could it have been the sign of these Watchers? Had they been here all along, waiting? And Henry's death, so sudden, a heart failure at 35 with no history of illness, could it have been orchestrated as part of some larger design? Sleep eluded her. At dawn, she rose and dressed without Martha's assistance, choosing her most formal black gown, high-necked and severe. She would meet Corvus as Lady Blackwood, not as a widow to be pitied or manipulated. He awaited her in the morning room, impeccably attired in a suit that appeared too fashionable for a banker's representative. He stood as she entered, his smile as perfect as it had been the night before. "Lady Blackwood, you look radiant this morning." "You're too kind, Mr. Corvus." She took the seat opposite him, maintaining distance. I understand you wish to discuss Thornfield's disposition. So businesslike, he said with a small laugh. But yes, that is one matter I'm here to address. He produced a slim portfolio. Your husband's debts are substantial, as I'm sure Mr. Finch explained. Obsidian Holdings is prepared to forgive them entirely. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. In exchange for Thornfield Manor, naturally. His dark eyes gleamed. Though we would grant you lifetime residence in the East Wing, you would want for nothing. Most generous. May I ask why Obsidian Holdings values Thornfield so highly? It's hardly the most profitable estate. Corvus leaned forward. Lady Blackwood, Eleanor, if I may, some acquisitions are made for reasons beyond immediate profit. Thornfield possesses historical significance to my employers. What significance? That's a complex matter, involving events before your time. His smile remained fixed, but something shifted in his eyes. Perhaps we could discuss it while exploring the grounds? I'd be particularly interested in seeing the West Wing. I understand it's been sealed for some time. Eleanor's pulse quickened. The West Wing is unsafe, Mr. Corvus. The floors are unstable. I'm sure we could navigate it safely together. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. His touch was cold, not the chill of poor circulation, but something deeper, as though coldness emanated from his very core. I believe you've already done so. Eleanor withdrew her hand. You seem remarkably well informed about my movements in my own home, sir. Corvus sat back, studying her with new interest. You're not what I expected, Lady Blackwood. Henry chose better than he knew. You knew my husband. Let's say I influenced certain of his investments, guided him toward opportunities that proved unfortunate. Corvus's smile twisted slightly. A man with gambling debts is remarkably receptive to promises of quick fortune. Anger flared in Eleanor's chest. You deliberately led him into financial ruin. I merely accelerated what was inevitable. The Blackwood line has been dwindling toward extinction for generations, in wealth, in vigor, in purpose. His gaze flicked momentarily to her abdomen, so quickly she almost missed it. Though perhaps not quite extinct after all. Ice formed in Eleanor's veins. He knew about the child. Somehow, he knew. Before she could respond, Martha burst into the room, her face pale with urgency. "My lady, come quickly. It's Mr. Winters." They found the caretaker collapsed in Edmund's study, his breathing shallow, skin grey with shock. Martha knelt beside him while Eleanor sent a footman for the doctor. "He shouldn't have been in the West Wing alone," Martha fretted, pressing a cold cloth to Winter's forehead. "He knows better." "What happened?" Eleanor asked the elderly man. Winter's eyes fluttered open, unfocused with pain. "I came to check, after hearing noises in the night. Found him here." "Found who?" "A man, in strange clothes, standing by the floorboards where—" His voice faltered. "Where the circle is carved." Eleanor felt Corvus enter the room behind her, his presence like a drop in temperature. "What did this man look like, Mr. Winters?" she asked urgently. "Like the portrait in the library, Lord Edmund." Winters clutched Eleanor's hand with surprising strength. But something was wrong with his eyes. They weren't human anymore. A soft laugh came from behind them. Eleanor turned to find Corvus examining the desk, Edmund's papers spread before him. "Fascinating," he murmured. "After all this time, the connection remains intact." He looked up at Eleanor, and for an instant, just a heartbeat, his eyes seemed to shift, black bleeding into the whites until they resembled pools of ink. "I believe our business discussions will have to wait, Lady Blackwood. There appear to be more pressing matters requiring attention." As he spoke, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost formed on the window panes despite the autumn sun outside. The air thickened with that metallic scent Eleanor had noticed when she first arrived. Iron left too long in the sun. Winters began to shake uncontrollably. "They're here," he gasped. "God help us, they're here." Eleanor looked from the dying caretaker to Corvus, whose smile had widened to reveal teeth that suddenly seemed too numerous, too sharp for a human mouth. "What have you done?" she whispered. Nothing, my dear Lady Blackwood. Corvus's voice had changed, layered now with harmonics that hurt her ears. But Edmund Blackwood, your house's unfortunate ancestor, has finally fulfilled his end of our arrangement. 2 centuries late, but we are patient. What arrangement? A door once opened requires blood to close it. Blackwood blood. Corvus gestured to Winters, whose shaking had stopped, eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. The first sacrifice is made, but we require one more to complete the ritual. Eleanor stepped back, one hand protectively covering her abdomen. You'll not have my child. The child? Corvus laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Oh, Eleanor, the child is merely a means to an end. It's you we've waited for all these years, the last Blackwood bride, the final key. As he spoke, the floorboards in the center of the room, where Edmund had described his ritual circle, began to glow with an unearthly light. Symbols carved into the wood centuries ago illuminated from within, forming a perfect circle of eldritch script. And in the center of the circle stood Edmund Blackwood, not the sorrowful spirit Eleanor had come to know, but something wearing Edmund's form like a garment, its eyes solid black, its smile a mirror of Corvus's own. "Welcome to Thornfield, Eleanor," it said in Edmund's voice, distorted by something ancient and hungry. "We've been waiting for you to come home." The floor beneath Eleanor seemed to shift, as reality itself bent around the glowing circle. She stumbled backward, one hand still protective over her womb, while the other groped blindly for support. Martha's scream pierced the air as the maid fled the room, her footsteps receding down the corridor. "What have you done with Edmund?" Eleanor demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady, despite the terror constricting her throat. The thing wearing Edmund's face tilted its head at an unnatural angle. "Edmund Blackwood has been our instrument for centuries, though he fought us longer than most." It stepped toward the edge of the glowing circle, but did not cross its boundary. His ambition opened the door. His bloodline will complete the passage. Corvus moved behind Eleanor with inhuman speed, blocking her retreat to the door. "The ritual requires a willing sacrifice, Eleanor. Tradition, you understand." His voice had regained its human quality, though the mask of civility seemed thinner now, something ancient and terrible peering through the facade. Edmund offered himself willingly, though he didn't fully comprehend the terms. "I never agreed to any sacrifice," Eleanor said, desperately scanning the room for escape. "Not yet," Corvus smiled, "but you will to save your child, to save what remains of your husband's spirit, to save Edmund, perhaps." His eyes glittered. "We've watched you develop a certain attachment to our captive." The false Edmund extended a hand toward Eleanor, its black eyes reflecting the eldritch light of the circle. "Join me, Eleanor. Complete what I began. There is knowledge beyond this threshold that humans were never meant to possess. Beauty and terror intertwined." For a moment, the thing's features softened into the Edmund she recognized. Sorrowful, haunted, human. "Help me," it whispered in his true voice, a desperate plea breaking through the entity's control. Eleanor's heart twisted. The real Edmund was still there, imprisoned within his own form, watching helplessly as his body was used as a vessel. Had he been conscious all these years, aware of his captivity, screaming into a void where no one could hear him? "I will help you," she said carefully, "but not by sacrificing myself or my child." Corvus laughed, the sound rippling through the air like stones dropped in still water. "You have courage, Lady Blackwood. Most humans would have broken by now." He circled her slowly. "But courage will not save you. The ritual has begun. The first blood has been spilled." He gestured to Winter's body, which had begun to sink into the floorboards as though the wood had become liquid, consuming him inch by inch. Eleanor fought the urge to vomit as she watched the caretaker's corpse disappear. "What are you?" "We are the Watchers," Corvus said simply. "We observe the infinite dimensions that border your reality. We catalogue, we collect, we consume when opportunity presents itself." "And what do you want with Thornfield?" The false Edmund answered. This house sits upon a nexus point, a location where the barriers between worlds naturally thin. Edmund Blackwood did not choose this site by chance for his ritual. The manor was built upon much older foundations, stones laid by those who understood the power of such convergences. As it spoke, the room seemed to stretch and contract, the walls breathing like a living entity. Eleanor realized with mounting horror that Thornfield itself might be more than stone and wood. It might be a living extension of whatever lay beyond the threshold Edmund had opened. "You've been manipulating my family for generations," she said, pieces falling into place. "The financial ruin, Henry's death, it was all to bring me here, wasn't it?" "The last Blackwood bride," Corvus confirmed, "carrying the last Blackwood heir. The bloodline has thinned over centuries, but yours remains pure enough, and your connection to Edmund, unexpected but fortuitous. It strengthens the bond." "What bond?" The false Edmund smiled. "You've felt it since you arrived. The pull toward the West Wing, the dreams, the singing that only you could hear." It tapped its chest. "Edmund's blood runs in your husband's line. His essence calls to yours. And now that connection will serve as the final key." Eleanor's mind raced. The journal she had hidden in her chambers might contain information about the ritual, perhaps even how to reverse it. But she needed time, needed to escape this room and the creatures flanking her. "If I am to be part of this ritual," she said slowly, "shouldn't I understand it fully? Edmund spent months studying before his attempt. I would see his research, his preparations." Corvus studied her with those depthless eyes. "Clever," he murmured. "Playing for time." He glanced at the false Edmund, but perhaps not unwise. The sacrifice is more potent when made with full knowledge. The entity wearing Edmund nodded. "I will show you," it said, and the room around them began to change. The walls dissolved into mist, revealing visions like paintings come to life. Edmund in Vienna, accepting ancient texts from a gaunt professor whose eyes glittered with the same inhuman awareness as Corvus's. Edmund returning to Thornfield, locking himself in the West Wing as he translated forbidden languages. Edmund drawing the ritual circle by candlelight, his face gaunt with obsession and fear. "He wanted knowledge," the false Edmund narrated, as the visions flowed around them. "The secrets of existence, the mathematics of reality itself. We promised him understanding beyond human comprehension." The visions shifted to show Edmund's ritual. Candles placed at precise points around the circle, incantations spoken in a language that hurt Eleanor's ears, a knife drawn across his palm to spill blood upon the symbols. As the blood touched the wood, the circle illuminated just as it had moments ago. Then came the horror, the air tearing open within the circle, revealing glimpses of something vast and impossible, geometries that the human mind could not process. Edmund's father bursting into the room, his face contorting in terror as he clutched his chest and collapsed. "The first blood," Corvus murmured beside Eleanor. "Unwilling but accepted nonetheless." The vision continued, Edmund screaming as something reached through the tear in reality, enveloping him in darkness that seemed to pour into him through every orifice. His body convulsing, then going still, before rising with eyes turned black and a smile that had never belonged to the human Edmund Blackwood. "We took him as our vessel," the false Edmund explained. "But the ritual remained incomplete. The threshold opened, but not fully secured. We could extend our influence through him, but not physically cross over." The visions changed again, showing glimpses across decades. The false Edmund watching from shadows as generations of Blackwoods lived and died. Corvus in different guises through the centuries, manipulating the family's fortunes. Henry meeting with Corvus in a London gambling hall, accepting loans that would ultimately claim his life. "For 200 years, we have worked toward this moment," Corvus said. "The alignment is perfect. The bloodline is prepared. All that remains is your consent, freely given." The visions faded, the walls of Edmund's study reforming around them. But something had changed. The circle on the floor pulsed with increasing intensity, and the air above it shimmered like heat rising from sun-baked stone. Eleanor stared at the false Edmund, at the thing wearing the face of a man who had suffered for centuries. Behind the alien blackness of its eyes, she caught a glimpse of the real Edmund, trapped, desperate, silently pleading. "And if I refuse?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Corvus smiled. "Then we take what we need by force. Your consent makes the passage easier, the door more stable, but it is not strictly necessary." The false Edmund suddenly doubled over, its form rippling as though two entities fought for control within the same vessel. "Run!" gasped Edmund's true voice, breaking through for a moment. "Eleanor, run! The library! The book with the brass clasp!" The entity reasserted control, Edmund's features contorting in rage. "Enough!" it snarled, and the temperature in the room plunged further, frost creeping across the floorboards. Eleanor seized her chance, ducking under Corvus's reaching arm and bolting for the door. She expected to feel his cold grasp on her shoulder, but instead heard a furious hiss behind her. Risking a glance back, she saw Corvus frozen at the edge of the circle, unable to cross its boundary. "The ritual constraints work both ways," the false Edmund growled. "For now, we are bound to the circle until it's completed, but not for long." Eleanor fled through the west wing, her heart hammering against her ribs. The brass-clasped book in the library. It had to contain something the entities feared, something that might help her close the door Edmund had opened. As she ran, the manor itself seemed to resist her. Corridors stretching impossibly long, doors that should have led to the main hall opening onto unfamiliar rooms, windows showing vistas that couldn't exist in Yorkshire. Thornfield was changing, reshaping itself as the barrier between worlds weakened. "Lady Blackwood!" Martha's voice echoed from somewhere ahead. Eleanor followed the sound, finally emerging into the grand entrance hall, where Martha waited with the doctor, who had been summoned for Winters. "We must leave immediately," Eleanor gasped. "The house isn't safe." The doctor, a ruddy-faced local man, frowned in confusion. "I was told there was a medical emergency." "Mr. Winters is beyond medical help," Eleanor said grimly. "Martha, we need to reach the library." The maid's eyes widened in understanding. "The West Wing? Did you see it again? The spirit?" "Worse than spirits," Eleanor said, leading them toward the library. "Creatures that want to use Thornfield as a gateway into our world." The doctor huffed in disbelief. "Lady Blackwood, perhaps you should lie down. In your condition, my condition is the least of our concerns if we don't find that book," Eleanor snapped, pushing open the library doors. The vast room appeared unchanged, thousands of volumes lining the walls from floor to ceiling. But as they entered, the door slammed shut behind them with such force that one of its hinges cracked. "They're coming," Martha whispered, crossing herself. Eleanor hurried to the shelves, scanning for a book with a brass clasp. "Help me search," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. The doctor, bewildered but seeing the fear in both women's faces, reluctantly joined the search. "What exactly are we looking for?" "A book with a brass clasp," Eleanor explained, running her fingers along leather spines. "It must contain information about the ritual in the West Wing, perhaps how to reverse it." As they searched, the library's temperature began to drop. Frost formed on the windows, and their breath clouded in the air. The shelves seemed to shift subtly when no one was looking directly at them, books rearranging themselves to hide the one they sought. "There!" Martha suddenly cried, pointing to a high shelf near Edmund's portrait. A thick volume bound in midnight blue leather, secured with an ornate brass clasp in the shape of a tree. Eleanor dragged a ladder to the shelf, climbing as quickly as her condition allowed. As her fingers closed around the book, Edmund's portrait began to change. The painted eyes bleeding to black, the mouth curving into that terrible, inhuman smile. "Eleanor?" it called in Edmund's voice, twisted by something ancient. "The child you carry belongs to us already. Its destiny was written centuries before its conception." She yanked the book from the shelf and descended the ladder, backing away from the portrait. You have no claim on my child. We have every claim, the portrait hissed, paint cracking as the face contorted beyond human proportions. The Blackwood line has belonged to us since Edmund's ritual. Your husband, your child, you, all ours. The doctor had retreated to the door, fumbling with the handle. It's locked, he stammered. Dear God, what is happening? Eleanor clutched the book to her chest, frantically working the brass clasp. It was warm to the touch despite the freezing air, and it fell open at her touch as though recognizing her right to its secrets. The pages were filled with handwritten notes in a feminine script. Catherine Blackwood's hand, she realized. Edmund's sister had recorded what she witnessed, and more importantly, what she had learned afterward about how to close the door her brother had opened. Listen to me, Eleanor said urgently, skimming the text. Catherine Blackwood discovered that the ritual could be reversed, but only under specific conditions. What conditions? Martha asked, keeping her distance from the portrait, which had begun to leak a black, tar-like substance from its frame. Eleanor read aloud, "The threshold, once opened by willing blood, can be sealed only by the same. Not the spilling of blood, but its willing return to the bloodline that breached the veil. What was torn must be mended by the same hand, or the hand of its direct descent." "What does that mean?" the doctor demanded, still wrestling with the locked door. "It means," came Corvus's voice as he materialized from the shadows in a corner of the room, "that only a Blackwood can close the door Edmund opened, and only through sacrifice." Eleanor looked up from the book, meeting his inhuman gaze. "You lied. The sacrifice doesn't require death." Corvus's smile faltered slightly. Catherine Blackwood was a meddlesome woman who understood little of what she witnessed. "She understood enough," Eleanor countered, continuing to read from the book. "The Watchers feed on fear and despair. Their promises are poison, their truths half-lies. They cannot take what is not freely given, cannot cross thresholds uninvited. Edmund invited them in ignorance, but their binding is not unbreakable." As she read, the black substance oozing from the portrait began to retreat, the painted face settling back into its original human appearance. Corvus hissed, his perfect facade cracking to reveal glimpses of something insectile beneath the human mask. "Enough!" he snarled, moving toward her with predatory grace. "The book changes nothing. The ritual has begun, the first blood already spilled. Your caretaker's death has weakened the barriers further." "Winters wasn't Blackwood blood," Eleanor said, understanding blooming within her. "That's why you needed me to consent, to willingly offer Blackwood blood to complete what Edmund started." Corvus's eyes narrowed. "Clever girl. But it changes nothing. The door is opening with or without your cooperation." As if to emphasize his point, the library walls shuddered, books tumbling from shelves as the entire manor groaned like a ship in a storm. Through the windows, Eleanor could see the sky darkening unnaturally, clouds spiraling above Thornfield as though drawn into a vortex. "We need to get to the West Wing," Eleanor told Martha and the doctor. "To Edmund's study, where the circle is." "That's suicide," the doctor protested. "Whatever's happening there is going to consume all of Thornfield if we don't stop it," Eleanor finished. She turned to Corvus, who watched her with calculating eyes. "You'll let us pass. You want me in that circle." "Indeed I do," he agreed silkily. "But your companions are unnecessary." With a casual gesture, he sent the doctor flying across the room, the man's body crashing into a bookshelf with bone-breaking force before crumpling to the floor, unconscious or worse. Martha screamed, backing against the wall. "You monster!" Eleanor whispered. "Not monster, collector." Corvus opened his hand, revealing a small, glowing orb that pulsed with the doctor's terrified consciousness. "His fear is exquisite. Yours will be even more so when you understand the full truth of what awaits you." "And what truth is that?" Corvus leaned close, his breath cold against her cheek. "That Edmund Blackwood is not what you believe. That his suffering has purpose. That his bloodline, your child's bloodline, was cultivated across centuries for this precise moment. The library doors swung open of their own accord. Beyond them, the corridor stretched toward the west wing, the air above the floorboards rippling like heat waves. "Go to him," Corvus urged. "Go to Edmund. Learn the truth before you make your choice." Eleanor clutched Catherine's book tightly, her mind racing. The answer to closing the threshold lay within these pages, but she needed time to understand it fully, and to do that, she would have to confront whatever waited for her in Edmund's study. The entity that had possessed him, and perhaps the real Edmund Blackwood himself. "Stay here," she told Martha. "Barricade the door once I'm gone. If I don't return—" She hesitated. "Flee Thornfield. Get as far away as possible. My lady, please," Martha begged, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Don't go to them. I have to," Eleanor said simply. "For my child. For all of us." With one last look at Catherine's book, memorizing the pages she had glimpsed, Eleanor stepped into the corridor. Corvus followed, a shadow at her heels, as she walked toward the west wing where Edmund, or the thing wearing his form, awaited her. The manor shuddered around them, reality bending as the threshold between worlds weakened with each step. And in her mind, Eleanor heard Edmund's true voice, faint but unmistakable. "Forgive me." The corridor leading to the west wing shifted like a living thing, portraits along the walls following Eleanor with painted eyes that blinked when she wasn't looking directly at them. The floor beneath her feet undulated subtly, as though she walked not on wood, but on the back of some vast, breathing creature. Behind her, Corvus's footsteps echoed with an inhuman rhythm. Sometimes too many steps, sometimes too few for a man with only 2 legs. "They're changing Thornfield," Eleanor whispered, one hand braced against the wall for balance, the other still protectively covering her womb. "Reshaping it to their design." "Not changing," Corvus corrected, his voice resonating from seemingly everywhere at once. "Revealing. Thornfield has always been a living entity. The stones remember what they were before humans shaped them into walls and floors. We merely remind them." As they approached Edmund's study, the air grew thick with that metallic scent, so strong now that Eleanor could taste it on her tongue. The door stood open, darkness spilling from the entrance like liquid shadow. From within came a soft, familiar singing, the melody that had first drawn her to the west wing, but distorted now, the notes bending in ways that human vocal cords could never produce. Eleanor paused at the threshold. "Before I enter, tell me one truth. One complete truth, without your half-lies." Corvus's perfect face rippled with something like amusement. "Very well. One truth. What awaits you in that room is both Edmund Blackwood and not Edmund Blackwood. The man you spoke with, whose sorrow touched your heart, he exists, but so does the entity that claimed him centuries ago. They have merged in ways even we find fascinating." Eleanor absorbed this, thinking of the moments when Edmund had seemed so human, so desperate for connection. Had that been genuine, or merely a performance designed to draw her in? Perhaps both could be true. "Thank you," she said quietly. Corvus tilted his head. "Courtesy, even now. Humans are endlessly surprising." He gestured toward the doorway. "After you, Lady Blackwood." Eleanor stepped into Edmund's study, Catherine's words from the book repeating in her mind. "The Watchers feed on fear and despair. They cannot take what is not freely given." The room had transformed. The circle inscribed on the floor now pulsed with vivid blue light, its symbols shifting and rearranging themselves continuously. Above it hovered a tear in reality, a vertical slice in the air itself, edges ragged like torn paper. Through this aperture, Eleanor caught glimpses of something vast and impossible, a landscape of twisted spires and geometric shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves, bathed in colors that hurt her eyes to perceive, and in the center of the circle stood Edmund, or what remained of him. His form flickered between the man she had come to know and something altogether different, taller, with too many joints, skin translucent enough to reveal shadows moving beneath its surface. "Eleanor," he said, his voice layered with harmonics that made her teeth ache. You've come." She approached the edge of the circle carefully, staying beyond its boundary. "I've come for the truth, Edmund, or whatever you truly are." The figure stabilized somewhat, settling into Edmund's human appearance, though his eyes remained solid black. "I am both, as Corvus no doubt told you." Edmund Blackwood opened the door and invited us through. We accepted his invitation, but the threshold remained incomplete, neither fully open nor fully closed. "Trapping you here," Eleanor said, "between worlds." "Yes." Edmund's expression flickered with genuine anguish. "For 2 centuries I have existed in twilight, neither fully human nor fully transformed, my consciousness preserved but altered, watching my family dwindle, generation by generation, until me. Until you." His black eyes softened somehow. "You were unexpected, Eleanor. Your connection to me, your ability to see and hear me when no one else could, it wasn't part of their design." Eleanor felt Corvus stiffen beside her. "What do you mean?" "The Watchers orchestrated much," Edmund said, glancing at Corvus with something like defiance. "The financial ruin of the Blackwood line, Henry's gambling debts, perhaps even his death, to bring you here, alone and carrying his child." Corvus remained silent, but the temperature in the room dropped further. "But they didn't anticipate our connection," Edmund continued. "The part of me that remains human recognized something in you. A kindred spirit, a soul that understood isolation, that yearned for something beyond the mundane world." "The singing," Eleanor whispered. "That was you." "Not them," Edmund nodded. "My one small rebellion. I called to you, hoping you might help me find release, not through the completion of the ritual, but through its undoing." "Enough," Corvus interrupted, his perfect composure fracturing. "The time for conversation has passed. The alignment reaches its peak, and the threshold must be secured." He turned to Eleanor. "You've heard his plea. Now make your choice." Eleanor looked between them. Corvus with his beautiful inhuman mask beginning to slip. Edmund trapped between worlds, both victim and collaborator in whatever the Watchers had planned. "Catherine's book mentioned a way to close the threshold," she said carefully. "Not through death, but through the willing return of blood to the bloodline that breached the veil." Edmund's expression flickered with hope, the first truly human emotion she had seen on his face since entering the room. "Catherine always was cleverer than me," he murmured. "She found a solution where I saw only damnation." "A solution that will fail," Corvus snapped, his voice distorting as his control slipped. "The threshold has evolved beyond such simple measures. It requires completion now, not closure." "You're lying," Eleanor said with sudden certainty. "Catherine found the answer, and you fear it." The tear in reality above the circle pulsed, widening slightly. Through it, Eleanor heard sounds like distant, discordant bells, and voices speaking in languages no human tongue could pronounce. Something was coming through, or trying to. She needed to act quickly. Recalling Catherine's words from the book, she pieced together what needed to be done. The threshold had been opened with Blackwood blood freely given, Edmund's ritual. It could be closed only by the same. Blackwood blood willingly returned to its source. "Edmund," she said, moving closer to the circle's edge. "The real Edmund, if you can hear me. I know how to free you." The figure in the circle convulsed, Edmund's features contorting as though 2 entities fought for control of the same vessel. "Eleanor," gasped his true voice, breaking through momentarily. "Whatever you're planning, the risk is mine to take," she finished for him. "For my child, for Henry, for you." Corvus lunged for her suddenly, his human disguise dissolving to reveal a form of shifting shadows and too many limbs. "You will not undo centuries of preparation." But as he reached for Eleanor, another figure burst through the study door, Martha, wielding what appeared to be an ancient iron fireplace poker. "Get away from her!" the maid shouted, swinging the poker with surprising strength. It connected with Corvus's inhuman form, and where it struck, his substance sizzled and recoiled like water on hot metal. "Iron," Eleanor realized aloud. "The old protection against entities from beyond." Martha positioned herself between Eleanor and Corvus, the poker raised defensively. "Found it in Catherine's book when you left, my lady. Said cold iron repels them, disrupts their ability to maintain form in our world." Corvus hissed, his beautiful face now halfway dissolved into something insectile and terrible. "Meddlesome humans, your interference changes nothing. The threshold will be completed." "Not if I close it first," Eleanor said, turning back to Edmund. The part of him that remained human watched her with desperate hope in his black eyes, even as the entity that possessed him fought to regain control. Eleanor knew what she had to do. The willing return of blood to the bloodline, not death, but connection. Edmund had opened the door with his blood. She carried that same blood in her veins, through Henry's lineage and the child within her. "Keep him away from me," she told Martha, nodding toward the writhing form of Corvus. Then, with a deep breath, Eleanor stepped over the boundary into the glowing circle. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Energy surged through her body, blue fire racing along her nerves without burning. The tear in reality widened above her, and through it she glimpsed vast entities watching with alien interest, the Watchers, observing from their dimension as they had for centuries. Edmund reached for her, his form unstable, human one moment and something else the next. "Eleanor, what have you done? Inside the circle they can touch you directly." "I know," she said, surprisingly calm now that she had committed to her course, "but they can't take what isn't freely given. And I don't offer myself to them, I offer myself to you, to heal what was broken." Understanding dawned in Edmund's eyes, both the human consciousness and the entity that had possessed him suddenly comprehending her intent. The latter recoiled, trying to pull away from her, but Edmund's will, strengthened by 2 centuries of resistance, held it in place. "Now!" Eleanor cried, reaching out to grasp Edmund's hands. The contact sent shockwaves through the circle, the blue light flaring to blinding intensity. Eleanor felt something flow between them, not just energy, but blood calling to blood, the Blackwood lineage recognizing its own across generations. "What are you doing?" shrieked the entity within Edmund, its voice no longer human at all. "This was not the agreement." "I'm closing the door," Eleanor said through gritted teeth, holding tight to Edmund's hands as pain lanced through her body. "Returning what was taken, healing what was torn." Outside the circle, Martha continued to hold Corvus at bay with the iron poker, though his form was regaining coherence as he adapted to its presence. "Whatever you're doing, my lady, do it quickly." Eleanor focused all her will on Edmund, on the human soul still present within the entity that had claimed him. "I forgive you," she whispered, the words Catherine had written in her book. "For the door you opened, for the knowledge you sought, the bloodline forgives its breach." Edmund's body began to change, the entity within him shrieking as it was forced out, not into the room, but back through the tear in reality. The Watchers beyond the threshold reached with appendages that defied description, trying to maintain their hold. But the circle's energy had reversed. Instead of drawing them in, it was pushing them out. "No!" Corvus howled, lunging past Martha despite the burning touch of iron. The threshold must be completed, but he was too late. As Eleanor spoke the final words of forgiveness, the tear in reality began to close, edges knitting together like a wound healing in reverse. The entities beyond reached desperately through the narrowing aperture, their alien thoughts pressing against Eleanor's mind with promises of knowledge, power, pleasure beyond human comprehension. She ignored them all, focusing only on Edmund. His form had stabilized, the black bleeding from his eyes to reveal their true color, the piercing blue she had seen in his portrait. His hands in hers felt solid, human, warm with life. "Eleanor," he gasped, his voice his own again. "What have you done?" "What Catherine discovered but could never implement," she replied, strength fading as the circle's energy drained her. Only Blackwood blood could close the door, not through death, but through forgiveness, through connection. The tear sealed with a sound like a sigh, the circle's light fading to a soft glow. Behind them, Corvus screamed as his form began to dissolve, his connection to the Watchers severed by the closing threshold. "This isn't the end," he hissed, his beautiful face melting away completely to reveal the nothingness beneath. "They are patient. They will find another door, another willing soul." "Not here," Edmund said, supporting Eleanor as her knees buckled. "Not through the Blackwood line. Never again." Corvus's form collapsed into shadow, dissipating like mist in sunlight until nothing remained but a cold spot on the floorboards. The room settled, the unnatural energies that had filled it receding, leaving only the normal sounds of an old house. Creaking wood, wind against the windows, the distant ticking of a clock returning to its normal rhythm. "My lady!" Martha rushed to Eleanor's side as Edmund helped her to a chair. "Are you hurt? The baby is safe," Eleanor assured her, placing a hand on her abdomen, where she felt a reassuring flutter of movement. "We are both safe." She looked up at Edmund, who stood before her in solid human form, no longer a spirit caught between worlds, but a man returned to life after 2 centuries of twilight existence. His face was haggard with exhaustion, but his eyes, those remarkable blue eyes, shone with wonder and gratitude. "How is this possible?" he asked, looking down at his hands as though seeing them for the first time. "I should have died centuries ago. Catherine wrote that closing the threshold properly would restore what was taken," Eleanor explained, her voice weak from the ordeal. "Your life was taken, Edmund. In closing the door, it has been returned." "A second chance," he murmured, dropping to one knee beside her chair. "At what cost to you?" Eleanor smiled tiredly. "Just energy, I think. Nothing permanent." She reached out to touch his face, confirming the solid reality of him. "You're truly here." The enormity of it struck them both. Edmund Blackwood, born in 1756, now knelt in 1843 beside the widow of his distant descendant, both of them forever changed by forces beyond human comprehension. "Thornfield," Martha said suddenly, looking around. "Is it safe now? Will it return to normal?" Edmund rose, surveying the study that had been his prison for 2 centuries. "The manor was changed by their influence, but not created by it. It will remain, though perhaps more mundane than before." He turned to Eleanor. "What will you do now? Corvus is gone, but the debt he fabricated against Thornfield was a fiction created by entities who no longer have power here," Eleanor finished. "I suspect Mr. Finch will have no recollection of Obsidian Holdings when next I speak with him." She struggled to rise, and both Edmund and Martha moved to assist her. Outside the windows, dawn was breaking, golden light spilling across a landscape that had returned to its natural state. The moors of Yorkshire, beautiful in their wild simplicity, no longer distorted by otherworldly influences. "We have much to discuss," Edmund said softly. "My place in this time, your future, the child." Eleanor looked up at him. This man out of time who had suffered centuries of isolation, whose blood ran in her unborn child's veins. There was no denying the connection between them, not romantic, not yet, but profound and undeniable. "We have time," she assured him, taking his hand. "For the first time in 2 centuries, Edmund Blackwood, you have all the time in the world." Together they left the West Wing, Martha following behind with the iron poker still clutched in her hand, just in case. As they walked through corridors that now felt merely old rather than alien, Eleanor thought of Catherine's final words in the book, the ones she had glimpsed before leaving the library. In closing the threshold, 2 souls might find healing, one ancient, one yet to be born. The circle completes itself not in blood spilled, but in blood united. Where darkness dwelled, light may yet flourish. As they reached the grand entrance hall, sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden beams. Thornfield Manor creaked and settled around them, no longer a prison or a portal, but simply a home, a place for new beginnings. Edmund paused at the foot of the staircase, looking around with eyes that saw his ancestral home truly for the first time in centuries. "I never thought I would walk these halls as a man again," he said quietly. Eleanor stood beside him, feeling the weight of the past lifting from both their shoulders. "Welcome home, Edmund," she said. "Welcome to the future." Outside, birds began to sing, their melody replacing the otherworldly sounds that had haunted Thornfield for generations. A normal sound, a hopeful sound, the start of a new day.